right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon genealogy lecture. I'm Jessie Wheeler. I am the genealogy specialist here at the Boston Public Library. I work in the Research Services Department at the Central Library. Before we get going, just to let you know, this is being recorded. We will be making the recording available on YouTube, and we will send that out to everyone who is registered once it's ready. And we will have plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to pop your questions into the chat if you have them. I will just ask that you please be respectful and keep your comments to the topic of the presentation. We don't need to talk about personal business in there. All right, so our guest today is Clotilde Yap from My China Roots. She is the head of global collections at for My China Roots. She researches on archives of Chinese communities all around the world and works with libraries, museums, and community organizations to preserve their collections. And she has assisted families from all over the world in tracing their Chinese family history since joining My China Roots in 2017. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to you, Clotilde.
Thanks for having me, Jessie. It's always a pleasure to present for the Boston Public Library. So welcome everyone to this webinar on how to use My China Roots, a database for researching your Chinese ancestors. What I like to do usually when we just get started is for everyone to just take a little bit of time and maybe share either in the chat, or I know that some of you are joining us from Malden Public Library in Massachusetts, just have a think about what it is you're interested in finding out. What stage are you at in your search? And is there something, either a person, an ancestor, or a question that you have that you want to learn about? And please do share it in the comments. We'll just take a minute or so to think about it and share with the others. And this will also allow me to get to know you folks and maybe answer some of your questions with my presentation. In the meantime, I can share a little bit about myself. So like Jessie said, I had the global collections at My China Roots. I do have Chinese ancestry myself, despite the accent. So my dad is Malaysian Chinese. He's third generation. So his great-grandfather came from Fujian in China to Malaysia, which is where my granddad was born, where my dad was born. But I was born in the UK, and my mother is French. So growing up, I was exposed to many different cultures. Growing up in a country that neither of my parents were originally from. And I actually was always interested in learning about my Chinese heritage and learning more about China in general, which brought me to studying Mandarin Chinese at university. And a few years after that, I found My China Roots, and since then have been advising families with their family history research. So I can see that, oh, Patrice Young. Have we worked together before, Patrice? I've worked with a Patrice Pat Young before. Uh, you have Zhongshan ancestors on both father and mother's side. Interesting. So Zhongshan is one of these areas that a lot of Chinese Americans can trace their roots from. As well as Guangzhou and Toisan. Nancy has just shared family from Toisan. Some folks are sharing that it's their first time. They're just getting started in their search. So this is perfect. This presentation will show you how you can start using a few really basic tools to get started and figure out what it is that you need. I'll be talking a lot about, well, not a lot. I'll be talking a little bit about the importance of the ancestral home. A few of you have mentioned where your family is originally from. And this is really a key clue as you begin your research because it will inform all of the work that you do to trace your roots. Maya has shared that there are transracial adoptee from Anhui province. So we've actually worked a lot with adoptees at My China Roots, and I can tell you more about this a little bit later. However, most of the database, the documents that we have available, unfortunately, are not really going to be relevant to adoptees because those documents, we simply haven't been able to get our hands on them yet. And it's much more challenging to yeah, to access that kind of information remotely. You have to be on the ground. But I can tell you more about this in a second. Um, yeah, we have a few other folks sharing about their ancestry. A few people are from Toisan. This is a place that seems to come up quite a bit. Um, and thank you to the librarians who are joining us and learn just to learn about this resource. So I'm just going to get started and try to keep your comments in mind, but do feel free to react in the comments, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. So what I'll be talking about today is give you a brief introduction to my China roots, who can use the database, how you can access it, and I'll show you a typical case study and walk you through how you would go about finding information, searching records. Just to give you a bit of background about us, so My China Roots actually operates um, in different areas. We do somewhat different things. So this presentation is going to be about our historical database, which is accessible remotely online, and allows you to discover records of your Chinese ancestors. Now, one thing that we have been doing for the last 12 plus years is also professional genealogy research. This is not part of the database. It's sort of a separate service that we offer for people who want to find their village, for people who want to find their relatives, whether they are distant relatives or biological family. So you can hire our team for assistance with this kind of work. We also do translation work. So we're the only professional Chinese family history firm that is based in China, advising families from all over the world. Um, Now, if you're wanting to just get started, one of the other tools that we have available, that is not accessible from the Boston Public Library, but you can always sign up and just get started on it for free as well, is our family tree builder. This was designed specifically for Chinese families. And so for those who are just starting out with their search, they don't really know what they should be doing. My tip is to start building your tree, whether it's on My China Roots online or just using pen and paper. If you start building your tree, you will immediately identify the gaps in your knowledge. Try to go back one, then two, then three generations and just see what comes up and what are the questions that arise. So, what exactly is in the My China Roots database? We have two main types of collections. We have overseas collections, so these are records of Chinese people after they left China. Um, so we collect various collections of immigrant communities, essentially, that are from North America, Southeast Asia, and a small number, we have a small number at the moment of Caribbean, um, and our Southeast Asian collections also are a bit smaller than the North American ones. But these are records found overseas of Chinese people, and they're mostly in English, but some will have some Chinese in them. Um, our China collections, meanwhile, contain over 200 million names that are found in family tree books. So these are pedigrees, they're clan books or family books that are kept usually within people's villages in mainland China, and they're fully in Chinese. But these are searchable on our platform, and I'll show you exactly how you can use them, even if you don't read Chinese. Which brings me to my next, just, I guess, introduction to the database is that it really was designed for people who don't read Chinese. So the My China Roots is for anyone who has Chinese heritage, of course, but more specifically, our records are going to be mostly focused on families who left China between the 1850s and the 1950s and 60s. And that's not to say we won't have records from other time periods, but that's the key focus. Now, during this time period, the majority of people who left, they came from two key areas. Guangdong and Fujian province. My ancestors are from Fujian. A few of you have mentioned you have roots in Guangdong. I saw also one or two individuals who commented that they had family in Yunnan and Sichuan. Even though this is not our primary focus, we will definitely have some family tree books from those areas. So in terms of Chinese records, we will have more of a broad coverage. Most of our users, they come from the US or Canada. We have a few also from Australia and the Caribbean and Southeast Asia. Um, but eventually, our goal is to cover the entire Chinese diaspora. So to also obtain records from Latin America and South America, for example. This also means that further down the line, there will be a version of my China roots, not just in English, but in French, in Tagalog. I think there was one user who has roots from the Philippines. We also want a version in Spanish, etc., etc. So this is just to give you a bit of background. Now, I think it was Maya who mentioned that she was interested in finding her biological family. So unfortunately, right, we won't have adoptee records, so to speak. But I think there are some things in the webinar that you will still find interesting about just general Chinese culture. So how do you access the database from the Boston Public Library? Um, so if you are in Boston or actually anywhere in Massachusetts and you have a Boston Public Library card, you can access My China Roots for free. You can find it on the Boston Public Library under online resources. And if you navigate to the section on biography and genealogy, it's still pinned at the top. You can also just search for it in the catalog and it will come up. Then when you click on the link, it will ask you for your Boston Public Library card number and your password. The other thing you can do if you're just visiting the Boston Public Library is you can just open the URL, so the link mychinarootslibrary.com on any device, on your phone or on your laptop, so long as you're at a library location, you will immediately be able to access the resource. Now, if you're not in Boston or you're in another part of the United States, we have a few other libraries that are currently subscribed. So here they are. A lot of them are on the West Coast. On the East Coast, we do have Princeton University that recently subscribed. If you are interested in getting access to it locally in your own library, simply just contact your librarian. Tell them, I would love to use my China roots. That's great for us because that means we can make our resource accessible else in more parts. Um, but yes, so if you need any help with this, do contact me if you're not sure how to go about this. And as I mentioned, so we have when you access the My China Roots from Boston Public Library, you will have full unlimited access to the records. You won't be able to, however, um, build your own family tree using the same account. So there's a difference between our library subscription and personal subscription. So if you want to build your family tree and connect it to records on the database, we have a separate subscription available that is on sale at the moment, but I can share more details about this a little bit later and send links. But essentially, how it works is you just input your family tree and you don't even have to do any research. You just wait for the system to automatically find matches between your tree, between people you've entered in your tree, and records that are in our database. Okay, so now I thought I'd get started with the actual demonstration of the tools. So let me just show you around the database, show you around the platform so you can get a feel for what is available. Um, so this is the homepage of My China Roots. When you log in from the library, or even if it's remotely using your library card, you will see this page, which is just a search form. You can see that there are different ways to search. The main one is an indexed record search. This just means that you're searching for a person on the platform. Um, Now, below it, you can browse the different categories of records that we have available. Some of them maybe you've looked at before, like census records, immigration records, directories, and other types of collections. Now, we also have some other resources that are available for those who are just starting out in their search. So, the first one is a surname database. If you're just starting out, ask yourself, do you know about your surname? Do you know what it means? Do you know where it comes from in China? Let's say you have a very typical Chinese last name, like Li. If you type it into the platform, you'll be able to learn a lot about the surname, including the fact that it is actually connected to lots of other Chinese sounding surnames. You can see what dialect it's pronounced in, but also where in the world this surname tends to be quite popular. And then the important thing is, and one of the key points I want to make in my presentation today, for those who don't know how to read Chinese, is that Li can mean very different things originally in Chinese. It can mean entirely different Chinese surnames. Um, so the main one, the first one is the Li that means plum. It's actually the most common one. But there are other Li surnames out there. Um, and so you should always try to check with your family, but also using this tool, you can check what country your family migrated to identify the correct surname. You might also be aware of the meaning of your surname. If so, you can use the definition as a clue to figure out which one is yours. Um, Now, even if you don't read Chinese, you might be able to recognize it visually. So let's say I recognize this is my surname at the top, and I'm going to click on it to browse more about how the surname is spelled. What are the legendary origins of this surname? Where does it come from? And in fact, it can be traced back to the Yellow Emperor, which is really ancient history. It's like 3000 BC. Um, and this is quite interesting about Chinese surnames. You may have noticed that a lot of Chinese people share similar surnames, and there are a lot fewer surnames in Chinese compared to other languages. And that is because you have some of these very big, influential clans, surname groups that have been around for such a long time and that are now amongst the most common, excuse me, in China. So just because you have the same Chinese surname does not necessarily mean you're related, right? The Lees just go so far back that today there are all kinds of groups of Lees that have been spread out and into different regions. On the same page, I can see that there are 684 Lee family tree books. So these books are we call them the Holy Grail in Chinese genealogy because they contain entire family trees, usually of one surname group, that comes from a specific place, usually a village or a town or a county, and they can go really far back. So I'll show you those a bit later. On the same page, I can see a breakdown of different records available, and I can see where in Guangdong, where in Fujian the Li's ancestrally come from. Um, at the bottom of the page, there's another breakdown. So we're still looking at the same surname, but this time we are showing you how the surname has been pronounced and adapted depending on the dialect spoken by the family and depending on the place that the family migrated to. So you'll see in Hawaii, in Indonesia, there are a lot of variations that take place. Depending on the place, Chinese people were encouraged to integrate and to adopt names that sounded more Indonesian, more local. So this is always really fascinating. Um, Now, just going back to the top of my resources, we had a few folks who shared about where their family is from. And so we have an ancestral village place tool, which is designed just for this. So let's say you've heard that your family is from Khoisan, but you don't really know what kind of place it is, how big it is. So if you type it into My China Roots, you will be able to learn all kinds of background information on your ancestral region. So Toisan is one of the 5 counties of the Pearl River Delta, and it's famously it is the ancestral home for a lot of Chinese Americans. Um, whereas there are 1 million people living in Toisan today, there's even more of them living outside of Taishan. So you can learn a bit about it. You can see where it is on the map. You can see the upper hierarchical levels of the address of this location. You can see how many family tree books from this region we have on the database, 142, including we have some of the bigger surnames like Li and Wong. And at the bottom, we have a breakdown. We show you a breakdown of all of the towns and the villages within Toisan, which is very important if you want to find more records of your family. You're going to need to know the village or the town that your family is from. So I thought I would take a an example of a sort of case study to walk you through how someone who's interested in their ancestors might want to use the database. So here we have Jenny. Meet Jenny. She is from Boston originally. She has Chinese heritage, but she doesn't speak Chinese herself. She knows that her grandfather was called Hong Fong Li. He lived in Philadelphia, but he kind of may have lived in other places too. He died in the 80s. She's heard her great grandfather was called Bong Li, and he originally came from California. And she just wants to learn a bit about them. She doesn't really know what they were doing, especially when they first arrived. She doesn't know when exactly they arrived. Um, and she hasn't really been able to ask her parents for more information. So there are a few, I guess, challenges here for Jenny. First, she's been struggling to get information from her family, partly because of the language. And this is a really common issue. Maybe some of you have experienced this as well, where the language barrier prevents you from really learning about your, yeah, your family history. Um, and I would say in the United States, at least, it is also quite common for older generations to be really reluctant to talk about the past. And usually this is down to the Chinese exclusion period, when Chinese people, were not allowed to settle in the country and they were really policed in all kinds of different ways. Life was made very difficult for them to actually settle um, and just live a normal life, right? So I think that tends to sometimes trickle down through to the generations, so much so that people are less willing to open up about the past. So this is just something to think about when you're doing this research. Okay, so let's start with Jenny's case. Um, yes, let me just switch my screens again and go back to the My China Roots database. So Jenny said her grandfather was called Hong Fong Li. So let's just type in his name in the main search form and see what comes up. So first name Hong Fong, last name Li. And because I don't know a year and he may have moved around a bit, so I'm not going to add a place filter. I'm just going to see what kind of results come up. So I have over 5,000 results for Hong Fong Li. Now, of course, they're not all going to be relevant to him. I'm sure there are a lot here that won't be Jenny's grandfather. So this brings me to my first big challenge that maybe some of you have experienced, which is you struggle to find relevant records of your ancestor. And again, this is related to the language problem because of Chinese being translated, or Chinese names being translated and transcribed into English, um, but you can't always trust the spelling of the names. Oftentimes, when a Chinese person immigrated to an English-speaking country, the immigration officer at the arrival gate, would not have spoken Chinese and would have written the person's name, the passenger's name, in whatever way they could. Same thing in the censuses or in civil records you might find. So it's quite typical when you're researching an ancestor, it's quite typical for the same person to appear in different records, but using slightly different names and slightly different spellings. Um, so my general tip is to not be too attached to spellings, because they can easily change. Names can sound a bit different if you're speaking Cantonese or another dialect. So don't be too attached to names. Okay, so let's take a look at the results that we've got now. On the left-hand side, you can see the types of records that have been found on the database. We have a mix of exclusion, census, travel, birth, marriage, or death. And if you scroll down, there are other ways that you can filter your results. You can filter them by the country that the document comes from. You could filter them by the date, by the gender, by the Chinese surname, if you know it, and by whether or not an image is available. Um, now, there are a few too many results here, so I am going to add a filter. We know that he died in Philadelphia, so he was definitely there at some point. So I'm going to type in Philadelphia in the filters and then apply search and see what happens. Okay, so now this has reduced my results considerably down to 63. Now this first result I'm going to click on is of Hongfeng Li in a Chinese exclusion book. So we have all kinds of collections on the database, but some of the more interesting ones, if you have Chinese American family history, are going to be exclusion records, especially if they arrived in the US during this time period. Um, so an exclusion book was kept at the key ports of entry of the United States to check the status of each Chinese person arriving. Because in theory, you weren't allowed to immigrate to the US if you were Chinese, unless you were native born. So if you were born in the US, or if you were the relative of a native born Chinese American person, or if you were a merchant or student or diplomat, you were allowed into the country. But you needed to prove it. You needed to have the paperwork. You needed to have a certificate of identity at all times, in different times of American history. So we're looking at a record of Hongfeng Li in one such book where he was asked to prove that he was allowed into the country. And it says he was residing in Philadelphia, so this is a match, and that he was admitted into the United States at Seattle in 1929, on the President Lincoln ship. So I'm not sure if it's him. I can take a closer look. Um, so if I click view an original record, it expands the image. I can look at the page, I can even browse the page before, the page after, and I can zoom in. And I always like to look at the original document because sometimes not everything has been transcribed for various reasons. So I'm going to look for Li Hongfeng, and he's listed on this line as a new arrival. And then it says S. Li Longbong. So this sounds a little bit like Jenny's great-grandfather, right, who was Bong Li. I think this is too much of a coincidence, and I think this might be her relatives, right? And again, this just proves my point about you can't trust names. If her great-grandfather's name was Li Longbong, who knows why he was only registered as Bong Li somewhere else? How come Jenny only knows him as Bong Li? So what does the S nat mean? It means son of a native. So that's why Hongfeng Li was admitted into the country, because his father is presumably native born. On the next line, it says where he's residing, so his destination. Then there are a few other fields. And at the top here, you say it says admitted. So this is the date that he was eventually processed and admitted into the country. And this was on December 3rd, 1929. Um, sorry, December 31st, 1929. Whereas the ship arrived, where is the ship date? The ship arrived on 4th of November. So if he arrived on 4th of November and was released on, 3rd of December, it is 3rd of December, then he would have been kept and processed or interrogated for about a month, probably. They would have checked, the INS would have checked his paperwork, interviewed him, made sure that he was allowed into the country. Um, so going back, I'm sort of 70% sure that this is my ancestor's record because of his father's name. Let's look at what else we have. So the other types of records that we have are also censuses. We have extracted all of the known Chinese individuals from censuses, from American censuses. And this is a record for Hongfeng Li in the 1930 census. So this would be 1 year later. Um, and it lists his relatives, including his father, Bong Li. So this is an exact match. I'm pretty sure it's him, his mother, Lin Shi, and all of his siblings. Now you notice how all of the siblings have very similar sounding names. They all start with Hong. And this is a typical practice traditionally in Chinese families for all siblings, and not just siblings, but cousins also, people of the same clan or surname. It's common practice for them to share a generation name. This generation name is dictated usually by the family tree book. It's like a guideline that every generation has to follow to name their children. And it's useful to know this because if you're coming across ancestors or their relatives, but you're not really sure if they're relatives, if they have similar sounding names, then it's probable they are either siblings or cousins. Um, so just keep that in mind. On the census, the great thing about censuses is you can see the family tree or you can see who they were living with. And you can also learn other basic information about the person, like their birth date. So I'm learning that Jenny's grandfather was born in 1908. Um, that he was 22 at the time of the census. So if he arrived just a year before, he was just a young man, 21 years old. Um, and I can see his address in Philadelphia, as well as his arrival in his arrival date in the US, which is 1929. So I'm now even more certain that the previous record I found is probably of him. So let's just go back for a second. Um, there there are not as many records of Hong Feng Li in Philadelphia. Now I'm going to see if I can find anything about Bong Li or Long Bong Li. So his father. So actually, I've forgotten to show you on the census, you can actually click on any of the individuals that are listed within the same household if you wanted to. Um, and And same thing, browse what kind of information is here. But the reason I wanted to show you is you can also collect things like dates of birth about these surrounding individuals, which is very, very helpful later if you want to narrow down your search, filter your results. So in the case of Bong Li, he was born in 1879 and was residing in the same place. But interestingly, it states his birthplace as California. So confirming he's a native born, but he wasn't born in Philadelphia, he was born in California. So this confirms also the family story that Jenny heard that he was from California. So going back, I'm going to now do a bit of searching on Lung Bong Li. So this was the longer name that he used in his son's arrival Chinese exclusion book. And I'm going to keep Philadelphia here and press search. So there are 34 results here. Again, different types of results have been found. If I click on any of these filters, it filters down by category, but I'm going to start with exclusion records. Now, one thing that I've shown you already is an exclusion book. But of course, the flip side of these books was the case file. Perhaps some of you who are joining today have already applied for their ancestors' case file. So if you have an ancestor who arrived in the United States during the exclusion period, they probably would have a case file at the National Archives. So My China Roots works with different partners to get its collections, including the National Archives. Sometimes they have indexes of the exclusion case files with images and sometimes without. In this case, there are quite a few from Philadelphia that have photographs, scans. So let's just skim the types of results that we have for exclusion case files. And there are a lot that are partial matches, so they're Bong Li, Long Li, but not exactly Lung Bong Li. Although this one here, Ling Bong Li, sounds a lot like Lung Bong Li. So this is maybe the more promising one in this list. Let's click on it to take a look. So a lot of these exclusion case files, because they're so big and rich in information, they often haven't been indexed in too much depth. However, we are working on adding gradually more information to them as and when we can. But when they're scanned, of course, you should always take a look at the original images. Um, so here is his case file. I'm guessing NB stands for native born because we know he was native. He was born in the US, in California. This case file is very short. It's just 1 page long, and it looks like a letter or an affidavit. And what's amazing is that it has these photographs at the bottom, which doesn't always happen, but a lot of case files do have photos or copies of passports attached to them. So it has the photos with their signatures. Now, this scan is quite old. It's taken from microfilm. So unfortunately, the quality is not great. But we do have these tools available. When you open any image on the database, you can select to extract text using OCR from the image. So what does this look like? If I extract these first 2 paragraphs, let's see if it will help me read a bit more of what is going on. So I've highlighted it and clicked extract text. And it should take a few seconds to process it. Now, of course, it's not perfect. It's not going to get every single word right, but you can kind of make out what it says from this. So Li Lingbong, duly sworn. He says he's a native-born son of the United States. He was born on DuPont Street, San Francisco, California. And then there's more information about his wife, Lin Shi, as well as his sons. It also lists his birthplace, Chenwan Village, in Sunning District in China. And actually, if you compare that text with, oops, sorry, zoomed in a bit too far, with the original images, you can make out some of the names gradually. So I'm pretty sure now that this is the same family because the sons listed are Hong Feng, Hong Sui, Hong Kim, or something like that. It sounds too much like the ones who were listed in the census before. The other great thing with this page is that he's written his signature in Chinese characters, which is really crucial if you want to find records of your family back in China. If you want to research the story of your ancestors before they arrived, before they immigrated, then you need to know their Chinese names. No one is going to know their names in English letters. And so again, this is really key. You can also use this extract tool, which works in Chinese too. Um, Longbong. So there you go. I'm just going to go back now and show you some other things that you might find. So we've looked at an exclusion case file, which is actually very short. There was only one page, but it had a lot of family information and information on when this person was applying to travel. Um, but other case files might be much bigger, much longer, and they can contain things like interview transcripts between the individual and the immigration officials. It can include copies of identity documents, lots of witness testimonies from, their sponsors in America, for example. So they can be really rich in information. If you know about a trip that one of your ancestors had taken, if they were coming back via San Francisco, for example, then it's likely there would be a case file for them at the San Bruno archives. Or for Boston, if you have an ancestor who wanted to travel from Boston to leave the country and then come back, he may have applied for documents from Boston. And so there might be case files for them too at the Boston National Archives. Um, so we've learned a bit more about Longbong Li, who is, um, we've learned his Chinese name. We've also learned that he was born in San Francisco, California, which means that probably at the start of his life, that is where he was based. So if I type in California, San Francisco, I may get somewhat different results in my list. So I'm going to filter this time by San Francisco, and I still get quite a lot of results, 676. This time, different types of results are appearing. We have a few, for example, directories. So some of the unique documents that are available in my China Roots are business directories and telephone directories of Chinese American individuals. A lot of our directories currently are for the West Coast, but we are working on adding one for New England, which features all of the key businesses and individuals and community members that were in generally the New England area in the 1930s. So the cool thing about these directories is that they were compiled by the Chinese community and so often have Chinese information on them. So when there is a Chinese name, for example, or address or business name, we do our best to index them. If it hasn't been indexed yet, it's because we haven't gotten to it yet. So here is a record of a Li Long, for example. I know this is not relevant because she's a woman living on Clay Street, San Francisco in 1949. But this is just to show you the types of materials that you'll find here, but you won't really find on other platforms. Um, and what other records have we got? So there is a case file for a Longbong Li here arriving in 1915. It could still be relevant to Jenny's great-grandfather because depending on how many trips he would have taken, he could have multiple case files in different archive branches. So what we try to do with the platform is group together as many of these different records as possible in one place. Here, there isn't a scan available, but we've added the link to the National Archives website so that you can, if this is a relevant file for you, you can click on the link and apply to get a copy directly from the archives. Now, this case file is for Li Longbong with his case file number. He's arriving on the Manchuria in 1915, but it doesn't say much else. So I would need to apply for a copy to learn about what might be in this case file. So going back, there's another interesting record here, which is of a Longbong Li in a banking book. So this book is actually also on a lot of my designs because I love this book so much. It's so beautiful to look at. It's also incredibly mysterious. It was found at the Bancroft Library in California and clearly was some kind of banking book kept by the HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, who had a lot of Chinese customers. And so it looks like Li Longbong may have either sent or deposited some kind of money, 1,000 US dollars in 1907. It says Li Longbong with his same Chinese name here. But otherwise, we don't really know what this money would have been used for. The cool thing about this book is sometimes you'll have annotations about the individuals that would have used the banking services. Like this one, it says Leong Li, woman, can't write. Um, but it is incredible to have photographs of some of these individuals when it's so rare to see photographs of Chinese individuals who are living in North America during this time. Um, Now, if you were to take any, um, sorry, let me just take a break for a moment just to re-emphasize the importance of Chinese names and why it is that we have so many records that are bilingual at my China roots. So I'm just going to pause and talk briefly about ancestral villages and why it's so important to know both your name and your village in Chinese. So I've talked a lot about ancestral places, how you need to know where your family is from. And the reason is if you're looking to trace ancestors before they migrated. So where were they really from? Why did they leave? Where did they come from? It will all boil down to knowing your village. So China, unlike other countries, doesn't have official historical records of individuals. They don't have something like a birth database or a death records database that you can just search. These records just don't exist. And they were only introduced on a national level in the 90s throughout China. So if you have an ancestor like Longbong or yeah, like Li Longbong, who was born in 1879 in China. No, sorry, he was born in California. So his parents, who would have been born in the mid 1800s, probably would not have any kind of official documentation um, recording their birth. That just didn't exist. However, what you might find instead are more local private sources that are kept in the ancestral village. So if you are interested in this, that is where you're going to find them. And what I'm talking about, for example, are oral histories of your family, or they could be ancestral tablets that are kept in an ancestral temple, um, usually in an ancestral village. For example, in my ancestral village back in China, in Fujian, I visited it twice, and there is a temple dedicated to our Yap. So Yap is my surname, our Yap ancestors. And inside the temple, you have inscriptions with history of the Yaps. Famous ancestors are listed there as well. But more importantly, you'll prob um, where you're most likely to find a family tree book is in the village. I mentioned these family tree books before, and they are really, really valuable. They can cover hundreds of years of names of every single person within your family. Um, so if you want to find your book, you would need to know your village. And previously, if you wanted to find your book, you would also need to probably travel to your village. You would need to read Chinese. You would need to otherwise hire someone like my China Roots and my China Roots professional researcher to travel to your village, to scan it, to take pictures. But we've made this whole process much easier through the database because you can actually search for them with just a Chinese name. Um, so let me give you an example of what that looks like. And you don't even need to know how to type or write in Chinese because let's say you come across a document that has Chinese characters on it, right? and you really want to see if there is, let's say it's the signature of an ancestor, and you want to know if there is a match for him in the database. So you can extract it like this, extract selected area, and it processes the Chinese characters. So you don't even have to write them out or figure out how to write them. You can even get a translation. I mean, it doesn't really help because it's just a name. But now I can copy paste these characters to then search for them in the database. So Li is the surname. Traditionally in Chinese culture, you put the surname first. And Yao Ting is the name. So let's say I have an ancestor called Yao Ting that I want to find on the database. So what do? I copy paste it, and then I'll go back to my main search. So there are different ways I can access it. I can do this here, or I can go to the Zupu search, so the specific family tree book search. And then I'm going to type in, copy paste the name, and then filter it by surname, which is Li. And what I'm doing now is I'm searching for instances of this Chinese name in the My China Roots database. There are 37 results for this name, that appear in 37 different books. So there are a lot of books because, as I mentioned, the Li is a big family. They probably have books all over China because wherever the Li's settled, they created their own histories, they created their own books. Um, and I know that the book I was looking at was of California. So let's imagine my ancestor, had Cantonese roots and went to California. So I'm going to filter the ancestral place as Guangdong, which is where Cantonese people come from. And I'm down to 5 results. Um, each result is one book. So this one is the Toisan Li family. The book was published in 2019, and there is one match found. So I'm going to click Examine Matches, and this opens on the left-hand side, shows you all the pages where the name was found. So if I look at this page, I can reorient it so I'm looking at it the right way. And I can zoom in, and as you can see, the Chinese characters are highlighted here. And even if I don't understand Chinese, I can use this pop-up English dictionary. It looks like a family tree, right? It's quite obviously a family tree, even without understanding what's going on. I can see that it's a tree. I can see that this is the top generation and that I should be moving downwards. So this is quite helpful when reading these books. The other thing that's helpful is usually there will be an indication of the generation. So this individual that's right here is of the 19th generation, which means that if he is my ancestor, so if the name of his son, for example, or other information listed around him is correct, match my own family tree, then I have 18 more generations that I can find just in one book. So it's very powerful and it gets you a lot of ancestors in one go. So I can again browse, click, hover over characters. The other cool thing is if you do come across on My China Roots a document that has a Chinese name, I've just come back to my banking record of Longbong Li. Whenever there is a Chinese name that has been extracted, we always automatically will search for it in the family tree book database. So at the bottom of this banking page, there is a link that says view 8 potential records of Li Longbang. And if I click on it, same thing, it will list all of the places where this name has been found. And you can see that some of the images we have clearly were captured on the go. So some of these books that have been digitized were photographed by our researchers who were visiting villages during some of our field trips. But others have been obtained from local organizations, local museums, local archives. So this is a brief overview of how you can access the different search tools, I just want to show you one last thing is if you're interested in general themes or topics, or you're not sure exactly, you're not ready to search for specific names, but you want to know what collections are available. Maybe you're studying the Chinese community in Hawaii or New England. You can type it in as a keyword just to see what comes up if we have anything. Um, and we do indeed, we've just uploaded this Chinese directory of New England, which would include a lot of individuals and families from Boston. We haven't indexed it yet, but it will be indexed soon. And again, these directories are fantastic resources. You can see lots of adverts and lists of businesses. Sometimes you have these cool illustrations that give you a really interesting and these even photographs and portraits, which is amazing. Um, yeah, which paint a picture of the Chinese community at the time. So that's it for my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about research, about using the tools. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Patil. So we have a few minutes here. I think you covered a lot of what people have asked about, but let me just take a look.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. So I think you pretty much covered this, but in case you want to emphasize it. So Mary was asking how much Chinese do you need to know to be able to use the database and records?
Yeah. Basically none. I mean, of course it helps a little bit, but we designed it specifically for people who can't read Chinese. And that's why we added all these tools to let you extract Chinese characters and then use them in your searches. That's why we have the dictionary tool. We actually very soon are going to be adding the ability for people to upload their own photographs. Let's say you have a tombstone, for example, of an ancestor that you can't read and you desperately want to extract the Chinese characters to be able to know what is a name. So you could upload it through the platform, get the Chinese characters that you need, and then use them in your searches. So that should be coming soon, which is very exciting and hopefully will help people with this.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay, so I apologize. I'm about to butcher these pronunciations. So
that's
Tina
okay.
is asking, does the database recognize spelling variations? So Taishan versus Toisan. So it's Taishan versus
Yes.
Toisan.
Yes, it does. So for places, it does. If we have recorded an alternative spelling of a place, we try to make sure that it's recognizable. It's not 100% comprehensive. Sometimes there is a spelling that has been missed or that is just so unique that we haven't come across it before. But for places, we do our best to record not just alternatives, but also historical place names. Now, for individual names, this is a whole other story, but we do, when you run a search for a name, we do keep in mind that maybe there are variations in spelling. So we always include similarly spelled names in your list of results, just to make sure you're not missing anything.
Right, okay. And so this question is more for me. So Elizabeth is asking, will this recording be available to share with family members? Yes, it will. I will be emailing a link to the recording once it's up on our YouTube channel, but our YouTube channel is open to the public. So once you get the link, you can feel free to share it. And I will also be sending it to really, if anyone asks, I will probably send it to them. So it's just going to be on our YouTube channel.
Great.
Okay, so Michael
Yeah,
is asking, how many databases or major sources have you uploaded from Canada?
great question. I'm guessing you have family in Canada, which is great. Thank you for joining us. Um, we have a small number of passenger records and sort of entry records of Chinese people coming mostly via Vancouver. But I am working on a partnership with um, the Library and Archives Canada to incorporate all of the immigrants from China database. So that will then be connected to our family tree records, family tree book records, and that will add at least 100,000 to 200,000 names. We do have one or two I believe, Canadian business directories, which will also be added very soon, but they're not indexed yet. So you might only be able to browse them with the images. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Nancy is asking, how difficult is it if you aren't sure what year your relative came to the country?
Yeah. Well, it always helps, but um it is possible to start with other records and then work your way back. Obviously, the year of entry is helpful because it provides a grounding kind of date around which you can look for like a passenger list or a case file. But as I think I showed in my example, even if you don't know, like in Jenny's case, my imaginary character, she didn't know when her grandfather first arrived in the country. But she got lucky because she found a census record that stated when he entered the US. So it's possible, but you just need to be a bit more persistent and maybe collect other types of clues and information um, before you can narrow down on the year of entry.
Great. Okay, thank you. So let's see. So Mary is asking, when will you be adding information on Beijing and Shanghai records?
Mm, good question. We aren't really focusing on northern China at the moment. We might actually have a few Zupu, some family tree books from Beijing and definitely from Shanghai, but not that many. So it won't be for another few years, I think, that we'll focus our efforts on other parts of China. If you do, need help though, and if you're not finding what you're looking for on our database, I invite you to, contact us at mychinaroots.com, or you can send me an email. We always, we love to hear from people, and if there's something that we can't do remotely online, then we'd be happy to help you track things down in China directly.
Great. Okay, let's see. So May is asking, I understand that some village names have changed after 1949. Does the database include those changes?
Not all of them. So that's a great question. A lot of village names, you can't really trust a location that you may have found on a case file because it doesn't exist anymore. So we actually have a lot of historical data, so information on historical place names, name changes. The challenge is how do you present that side by side with the modern location if, say, the boundaries of the place has changed. Um, you also have another challenge, which is that some places have kept the same name, but they've grown bigger or smaller, or they've sort of they have merged with another neighboring village. So we're kind of struggling to find the right way to present these this kind of information. But we do have historical data stored in the back end.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see. So Marlene is asking, do you have a shareable list of items that are in the works to be uploaded?
Oh, I wish we did. That is a really good idea. Unfortunately, not. It's sort of all internal. But I could suggest this actually to our engineers to expose it because it's helpful for people to know what's coming up and if they should check back in. But in the meantime, leave it for a few weeks. If there's something you don't see that's relevant, and then check back in a month later or so, and maybe you'll find something new.
Definitely. Okay, so that is all that's posted there right now. So, okay, so I guess that's it for questions. So thank you, Clotilde, for joining us. I know it's kind of late over where you are. We really appreciate it. And
No,
of
that's okay. Happy to be here.
course, it's great. Okay, and thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. So I know it's unusual to have a presentation at this time. We really appreciate it. So if you
Thank
have
you.
any more, so if you have any more questions for Clotilde, you can see her email address right there. It's a clotildeyap@mychinaroots.com, or you can also email me. I think my email address is in all of the communication you've gotten about this. So if you have any more questions, that's how you can reach out to us. And our next local and family history series presentation will be on December 11th. We will have a guest speaker from the Leventhal Map Center, so you can learn about using maps for genealogy. So if you're interested in that, definitely check that out. Everyone will be getting a follow-up email tomorrow. I will have a link to the chat transcript as well as information about our upcoming programs. So once again, just thank you, Clotilde, and thank you all of our attendees. And I hope everyone has a good evening and a good weekend.
You too. Good evening. Good day. Good afternoon.
Wherever you
Thanks,
are.
Jesse. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.